the Eugene Water and Electric Board meeting to order. First up, I'm going to do a quick facility and safety awareness meeting logistics briefing. Thank you all for attending this evening's board meeting. EWEB management and subject matter experts are here with us in the room and virtually. During tonight's presentations, remote presenters will appear on screen. Please make sure to speak loudly and clearly so everyone can hear you. Guests are invited to sign up at the table at the back of the room if they wish to provide public testimony. Their access is limited to the board meeting room and restrooms. Restrooms are located through the floor exits and down the hallway. In case of an emergency, such as a fire alarm, exit through the glass door at the back of the room, unless it's not safe to do so. The alternate emergency exit is located at the rear of the building, just beyond the restrooms. During evacuation, follow staff's instructions and stay together for safety. Tonight's meeting will be recorded. The recording will start when the meeting is called to order, so it's will continue until adjournment. The meeting room will be muted during break. Aside from that period, virtual participants on the screen and the public audience will be able to hear conversations in the room until the meeting is disconnected. Okay. That is the public awareness briefing. Now we'll go to agenda check. Any agenda items? Okay, seeing none, we will go into items from the board members and general manager. Would anyone like to start? Okay, John.
A couple of things. Thank you. Thanks to staff for getting back to me and about the status of getting that graffiti off that brand new substation wall that we spent so much money on. It's been 6 months, and I understand it's still ongoing, but the neighbors are not happy, and it's doing that. So thank you very much. And just I forgot to mention something about EWEB staff and things. At the end of the year, the old analogy, time kills deals. Well, there was trying to get a gifting of a part of the old Lazy Days mobile home park on the Mackenzie, and it had like 14 septic tanks on it. And time was killing that deal, and staff stepped up, made it happen. Got it in the ownership of either EWEB or Mackenzie River Trust, but we prevented it from going in and being developed and things. And so thank you, kudos to the staff and to the general manager for doing that, because it was on the brink of not happening, and they got it done. Get it done. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Staff Commissioner Schlossberg and then Borowski.
Now I can't remember if this was just in the past month or the month before, or if I even mentioned it last time, if it happened the month before, but I just want to thank staff for working hard with the Vida Community Center to help them make up their budget shortfall in building a new community center there. They had larger than anticipated costs for electrical, and the staff did a really great job, working with them to help make that happen.
Again, I can't remember if I mentioned this the last month or not, probably in moment, but I did have the opportunity to tour the new water storage facilities at 40th and Donald. Not 40th and Donald, but 40th and Hilliard. It's coming along quite nicely. They're big tanks up there. I would encourage people that even if you can just drive up to the end of the street, but if you have the opportunity to take a tour of it, it's pretty impressive what they're doing and the things that they're doing to help mitigate impacts to the neighbors are well heeded. It's a tough thing having a project that big as close to you are, and I'm proud of what staff and the contractors have been able to do up there. And secondly, I just want to mention that the the dinner that we had as a commission was very productive. You know, we didn't deliberate on anything like that. We just kind of got to know each other a little bit better and kind of where we feel that we can lean into certain issues and topics. And so I thought it was a very productive meeting, and I appreciate being able to do that.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks was able to attend a couple of neighborhood meetings with the downtown neighborhood association and then the friendly neighborhood association. And staff fielded a wide variety of questions about almost everything and really professionally and well done. So appreciate the staff effort in setting those up, attending them and being there completely. Thanks.
And I also appreciated, Frank and I attended the Whitaker meeting earlier in January, and I think that went really well, and I appreciated feedback and support on that meeting as well. And I also wanted to note that the LCOG dinner, the appreciation dinner, is coming up on March 4th. It's at the Cottage Grove Armory, and I sent out an email earlier today with the information on nominations. There's a number of different awards, so would love to have your feedback, nominations to help recognize those in your community who are doing really great things. So please get those in. It's due on the 17th of February. I hope all of you can attend. All right, that's what I have. So Frank, you're up.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. Just a few announcements. So I think previously commissioners had asked for some talking points regarding the funding request for the second water treatment plant. What you have tonight is some talking points as well as a leave behind. This is sort of a first draft for use when you're talking with public officials or people who may be in positions to help with that. I did want to thank our communication staff, our water staff, and Jason and others for putting this together. I think it's really nice leave behind on the subject so that people remember what you were talking to them about. The other thing, certainly appreciate the downtown neighbor opportunities to meet with downtown neighbors, Friendly Street, Whitaker. There's more on the list and more to come. In particular, the Friendly area neighbors was a collection of staff doing different subjects in kind of a quick hitting format. So I definitely wanted to thank them for that. And then fielding, like Commissioner said, a series of questions. I also wanted to make an introduction. We have a new Chief Energy Resources Officer who's joined us, Brian Booth, who's behind me, and comes from Snohomish PUD up in Everett, Washington. And so you want to just say hi or, you know.
Good evening, commissioners. Inspirational speeches aren't really my thing, but I did want to say that I've come here for an awesome position at an awesome utility, and also that I wouldn't have changed if I didn't know that had a supportive and friendly board. Not every utility can say that much, so thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Right. They just look friendly. I'm not sure if they're as friendly as they think, but anyway, Brian will be responsible for the power trading and the power planning function at EWEB as we go forward. And as you know, we have probably $2.5 billion worth of decisions to make in those areas over the next 5 years or so. So there's no pressure whatsoever on Brian. But anyway, that's it, President Carlson. Thank you.
Well, so there's item said, we will move on to public input. I have 2 by phone and potentially 2 in person, maybe just 3. So we will start off with the people on the phone. And first up will be William Smith, followed by Joshua Korn, and then we'll have the person in the room, William McMahon. Start there. So let me read the public input procedure and input. So just you have information here. When your name is called, please come forward and clearly state your name and optionally your address or ward. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time by watching the timer at the front of the room or by listening for an audio notification when 3 minutes has elapsed. If you are participating by telephone, remember to unmute your call. Press *6 if calling from a landline, or simply use the unmute button if calling from your cell phone. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy we do not engage. Please note that failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. If a question is presented by a speaker and the board does not provide an answer, an EWEB staff member will be in contact with the speaker so the question can be addressed at a later time. Okay, I think that is all we need here. So this is what we're going to do. I'll call William, we'll give him a few minutes, and then we'll call the next person up. So William Smith, are you ready by phone? If you're there, we cannot hear you yet. Give you a second to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you.
Great, thank you. William Smith, Ward 1, following up my public input from the last 2 or 3 months on what EWEB might learn from the Electric Power Board of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and their $2.69 billion return on investment on their community-wide fiber optic network. And I also talked about what EWEB might learn from the successful ongoing rollout of the community-wide fiber optic network in Hillsboro, Oregon, which is the 5th largest city in Oregon at 108,000 people. The Hillsboro rollout is ahead of schedule. It's been so successful. Originally, the timeline was from 2020 to 2023, and you can see the 7 different major sections of the city, one by one, being fully implemented. But they're 2 years ahead of schedule. Everyone knows about the program in the city. They have a dedicated website, and they have 7 staff dedicated. You can visit the website and see them. They hired somebody from the telecommunications industry with leadership experience, and he's running a team of 7 staff, a diverse team, and it looks like they're very enthusiastic. And I think they probably know about Chattanooga. I think that's probably why they're investing people in this program, because the widely known Chattanooga study that showed a $2.69 billion return over 10 years in their fiber optic community-wide network with benefits, widely shared economic and social benefits. So I'm hoping, and a number of us that I've been talking with here are hoping that EWEB can not reinvent the wheel, but follow the example of Chattanooga and Hillsboro. And the service that Hillsboro is offering is at $55 a month for 1 gigabyte per second broadband service. And for low-income people who qualify, it's $10. And fiber optics, if you look in, and you probably know the economics, it makes sense that Hillsboro and Chattanooga can help people save thousands and thousands of dollars over years, and which they can reinvest in the community. Fiber optics allows that. So I hope you'll consider it. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Next up, Joshua Korn.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Are you there? We could hear you. Now we can't. Are you there?
I guess I muted myself and now I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, Joshua Korn, Ward 2. Back years ago, before EWEB rolled out the smart meter program, as you call AMI, Advanced Metering Infrastructure, a number of us Eugenians came out and expressed our concern over the grave dangers of implementing this technology. Then a few years after that, you listened to us, and we appreciate that you listened to us at that time and actually implemented the first opt-in smart meter program in the country, I believe, at that time. And Maui Hawaii has implemented a similar situation with an opt-in smart metering program. Well, unfortunately, what happened a few years after that was that you realized that we don't want this. No one wants this, and the community never opted in for it, and so you recanted that decision and started to basically implement this all over without question and forced people to opt out if they didn't want it. I want to reference a recent article in the Children's Health Defense, the Defender from Robert F. Kennedy, which I've emailed to the administrator, and I'd like that entered into the record of the minutes for this meeting. And I want to point out a few points from this article, including in 2021, researchers including Beverly Rubik, founder and director of Frontier Science, reviewed over 250 peer-reviewed research reports on radio frequency wireless radiation, including and concluded RF radiation may cause morphologic changes in erythrocytes, including achinocyte and rouleau formation that can contribute to hypercoagulation and impair microcirculation and reduce erythrocyte and hemoglobin levels, exacerbating hypoxia, amplify immune system dysfunction, including immunosuppression, autoimmunity, and hyperinflammation, increase cellular oxidative stress and the production of free radicals, resulting in vascular injury and organ damage. And I could go on and on about all these dangers, but the point I want to make here today is, if these are the case, why then, and a part of the World Health Organization classified radio frequency radiation as a 2B possible human carcinogen. Why do some people get sick from this and others don't? And the reason is that some people are contributing. All right, I'll continue next time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next person up is William McMahon.
Please go ahead.
Yes, please.
Well, I'm William McMahon from 2665 Highland Oaks Drive. I'm not sure what ward that's in. Anyway, I'm a big proponent of hydroelectric, and I've recently become aware that the Lieberg Hydro Project is not generating any longer because of a canal issue. And I guess I was just here to try to drum up support for rectifying that. If my numbers are correctly, that facility generated, I don't know, 8 to 10 megawatts on average. And that's like $5 or $6 million a year in revenue. And I just can't see why EWEB would step away from that kind of a revenue stream just because the canal needs some maintenance. So I'm just here to encourage both staff and the board to pursue repair and getting that facility back in operation so that the citizens of Eugene can benefit from this cash flow. Thank you.
Next up is Chris Jones.
Greetings, board and staff. I'm Chris Jones. I live in South Eugene. This is a comment on the draft greenhouse gas principles that were provided as part of the board memo on the draft climate guidebook that Kelly and Jason will present on later. Surprisingly to me, I only saw one opportunity for improvement. Some of you know that I'm very detail oriented and like to offer lots of feedback. In the distributed generation section, there's a sentence that says EWEB supports pricing mechanisms that fairly compensate customers for surplus electricity that they generate. And I thought that statement could benefit from an update given some changes in technology that's available. So the advent of home grade battery storage systems from companies like Tesla, the Powerwall, along with vehicle to grid technology, allows customers to supply deliberate, controlled flows of electricity back to the grid from their homes and businesses without an on-site generation source like a fuel cell or solar panels or generators. These controlled sources, similar to the controllable demand reduction programs that have been piloted by EWEB, could be very valuable to EWEB during times of peak demand. And so the customers who could be supplying this peak power, I would think would be expected to be compensated accordingly and included in that principle. So it could be that some updated wording could recognize that controllable distributed resources, not just generation, could be a valuable resource to EWEB, not just a source of potentially undesirable surplus electricity. And so I might suggest something like EWEB supports pricing mechanisms that fairly compensate customers for surplus electricity that they supply to the grid. So a small wording change. I can hand this off to Kelly and Jason if that's all right. Since I got 50 seconds left, if any of the board members have any questions about the decision to go from opt-in to opt-out on smart meters, I'd be happy to talk with you at length about that 2018 decision. Rather leave it in the past, that's okay too. So thank you for your time and for your continued board service. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
That is it. Yes, okay, that is the conclusion of our public input period. We will allow the commissioners and Frank to give any comments, should anybody choose to.
I'll start and say thanks for coming in and sharing your thoughts, and those online as well. Appreciate you taking the time to share your thinking with us. I appreciate the comments, Chris. And it'll be interesting to hear the discussion tonight. Stick around if you have a chance. And Mr. McMahon, it was a hard decision, but I think when we looked at the calculations associated with Lieberg, it's just more expensive than any of us would have hoped to put that system back into use. So there's a significant amount of information online, and if that doesn't shed some light on our decision-making process, I know the staff here are always happy to, help folks understand where we're going and why.
Yeah, I can touch.
Yeah.
That information. Thanks.
We'll close the public input session. Move on to our next agenda item. So agenda item, approval of consent calendar A. Anyone want to pull anything? Okay, John Brown.
Number 2, the Brink Brothers contract. Karen, that was a great explanation, but I still need some more from Frank. Thank you.
Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the remainder of it? Okay. Right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Okay. That's unanimous. Let's go to,
Okay, so the contract, jump in and correct me wrong, so I know it's a $4 million contract, but Brink Brothers bid $633,600, but they didn't bid all elements of it. So we're authorizing this contract to Brink Brothers, Oregon Woods, TBI, and Forest Restoration, but their bids, it appears that they all bid the entire project, but they're way, $1.4 million, $1.5 million. So either the cumulative total exceeds $4 million. Did, like Oregon Woods, they did all the elements of this bid package, or did they just also bid partially like Brink Brothers?
I'll have to defer part of that question to Quentin and Gina. They're online, but part of that is what we're trying to get is capacity and it's as needed. So they will control the actual scope of work for each of those contractors in terms of what they're asking them to do. So let me ask Gina and Quentin, if you can answer the question of what did each contractor bid on?
Yes, so commissioners, I'm online here. I think Gina could actually speak to that. She's the project manager for this project. She has a better idea exactly what they did bid. I do know that they each, there was multiple lots that they bid and not all of them, like you said, the one contractor only bid a portion of that. So I guess if you're looking at like a lump sum table, they would look like they're a lower bid, but not necessarily, they wouldn't necessarily be low if they're doing the same amount of work. They just didn't bid all the aspects of that work. So Gina, you might be able to explain that a little bit better.
That's correct. So when we put the solicitation out, it was, we already knew it was going to be a multi-awarded bid, and that they could bid on different lots so that we could also award per lot rather than the entire contract. The reason why that we have accepted 4 of them to do work up the river at $1 million apiece is because we are looking for that capacity. So the money that we're asking to be approved tonight may or may not be utilized in full. But what did attract me about the Brinks bid is that he's got some larger equipment than the other contractors. And there has been ask from the program managers on the ground to be able to have larger equipment come in to masticate blackberries and such so they can get in there and get a better planting after it's been sprayed and site prepped. Does that help answer?
Well, just so I can understand it, so Brink Brothers is a contractor and they're subbed to all these other people? Or we're gonna do 4 separate contracts, because this indicates to me that the contract was to Brink Brothers. And they were only 658,000, but the contract for 4 million.
I understand it's 4 contracts. Is that correct, Gina?
Yes, we're hoping to award 4 separate contracts.
So
he will not be subbing under them.
Said calendar item says 1 contract for 4 million. So I'm confused. I'm gonna approve it. I'm all for what you're doing. Before I approve a $4 million contract, I'd like to understand it.
The top section says asking the board to approve 4 new contracts and then list them all. So I wonder if it's down at the bottom that we have a typo saying 1. The action request says 4 contracts.
Okay, so the contract is with Brink Brothers for $1 million, and each one of them gets $1 million.
Not to exceed, and it's as needed.
Okay, but when they bid $1,459,400, that was for the entire package.
Is that correct, Gina?
That's correct. Had we gone with the actual awarded amounts, this ask would be over $7.5 million, which I don't feel that we're going to expend $7.5 million. So in talking with my buyer and the water restoration group, it was more equitable to offer $1 million contracts to each.
So when TBI said they were going to do the full project for $1,447,152, they were going to do everything for $1 million
over 5 years.
5 years.
Yes.
Okay, so one contractor was going to do everything for $1.4 million. Well, you're saying no, and you're saying yes. So I'm getting mixed messages. I don't understand it. $4 million or $1.5 million to do this project.
Gina, can you explain that better?
I'm sorry to be so.
No, it's okay. I understand where you're coming from. So if we would have went, first of all, the contracts upriver are much more complicated than a typical contract. So we don't always go with the actual awarded price. Sometimes we're looking at the funding rolling in. Sometimes we do what we did in this situation. I needed capacity up there more than I needed one more contractor. So I was very specific that the solicitation would allow a multi-award and that it could be by lot, in the hopes that somebody could help pick up the different areas that we need help with up there. Right now we have one contractor that is at capacity.
Well, thank you. I'm going to approve. I'm going to vote to approve it, but could I ask for a follow-up on this a year from now and see what each category is spent? I'd just like to kind of track this because this is not something that I've seen in many, many years. I just wanted to see how it works. So thank you. If you could follow up with me a year from now, just let me know how that do. I'd appreciate it. So my questions are done.
Okay.
I'll move to adopt item number 2 on consent calendar day.
Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimously. Moving on to consent calendar B. Does anybody have anything to pull from that calendar? Okay, seeing none, motion?
Move to adopt.
All right. All those in favor, say aye. Okay, also passed. Next up, we have the EWEB City of Eugene Joint Initiatives Agenda. Moderated by me, so I don't know if anybody else is coming through, so we'll.
You want me to do a quick introduction?
Okay, that would be great.
Go ahead with the next slide. This is a discussion that we initiated last year as part of the formal process for our leadership, President Carlson this year and President Borofsky to get feedback and guidance and direction from the board as to their liaison role with the city of Eugene, and if there were specific subjects or positions that they needed to communicate on behalf of the board. And so we started developing a roster of initiatives or topics, really as guidance for the president and the vice president representing the board with the city of Eugene in their leadership meetings. These can be as simple as sharing information, soliciting support, asking for feedback, or taking positions. It's really a board discussion. And after teeing it up that way, I'll turn it back to you, President Carlson, to lead that discussion.
Would you like to give some thoughts? Okay.
Something that we've talked about them last 2-3 years, but 4 years that we've been meeting with them is how we can partner on weatherization of rental units. And so we just seem to keep going around and around and around on this topic. But I think that's something that we should lean into more. I think it would be a great way for us to partner. And I know that their representatives change just like ours do. They have different council members, but the mayor has been there from the beginning, so she might remember that we've talked about this before. So that would be my suggestion.
All right, well, I'll just jump in and echo that. And I know that in the past, we've also talked about ways that we can coordinate on resiliency. And I know staff do a lot of that work too, but it would be helpful to maybe have an understanding of maybe if there are any gaps in that work so that we can work with with the council specifically to if there are any barriers or things that could work. So.
A couple of points. I watched the council's deliberations last night. Weatherization was big in the conversation. It was very big. And incentivization to go off fossil fuels was also big. And so I think we'll have a role to play in all of that. So I would really support, especially the weatherization of the rental pool, because tenants aren't going to do it, landlords aren't going to do it. It's a catch-22. We're going to have to step in and do it. And like I said before, I at an NWPPA conference, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD, they apparently had a very, very successful program in weatherization of their rental pool. But I don't care if we plagiarize somebody else or whatever, but if somebody else has already walked point on this, let's do it and not just talk about it. I would really like to see some action done, especially on that particular topic. As a side topic to, this is kind of getting like base level storage and treatment plant. But Frank, why don't we decommissioning River Road, the water reservoir? It's in the plan to go, I think. And when is it going to go out?
Yeah, I think we're actually evaluating the timing of, are you talking about Santa Clara?
Yeah, Santa Clara.
Yeah, I think we are, the engineering in their capital planning this year is looking at the timing of that relative to the other base level reservoirs. So I think it's still open as to the exact schedule, Mike.
The only reason I bring that up because we're gonna have to get out ahead of that because we don't need that anymore. We declared surplus, the city's gonna want it. There may be some land use things there because it's a huge chunk of really nice residential development land. And if we could help that, put that into buildable lands inventory, I'd like to make sure that we don't get, sideways with land use and things like that.
Yeah, I think we're still talking a number of years off. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've got some meeting, Mike Masters, Water Operations Manager for the record. We've got some meetings coming up later this month. To kind of plan for the future of Santa Clara. We'll be working on a new master plan next year as well. So we understand the critical component of the timing of those reservoirs. So maybe by next month's meeting, we'll have some more to say on it.
But just knowing how long some of those take to decommission and repurpose, and we have to do metro plan amendments and things, I just wanted to make sure we kept that on our radar so it doesn't fall by the wayside, because it's a big chunk of land.
Your point relative to this discussion, Commissioner, is to start coordinating and sharing with the City of Eugene.
Thank you.
John Ross.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would like to just kind of echo what some of the other commissioners have said regarding weatherization and how that affects our climate goals, the city's climate goals, our RIP goals, a lot of those things. And I really hope that we can push forward beyond just coming up with talking plans saying we think we should do this. I think it's important for us in the city to really lean into this. And if that means that we're the more functional person in the room, so be it. But I think if we go in there with positive energy in this meeting and expecting that the next time we meet that there's progress on it, not just, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And if our staff needs to lead on that, I think that's important. One of the other things that I think is that I hope we could touch base on, this kind of came out of what Commissioner Brown was talking about last night when they were talking about feeding into incentives and stuff like that, making sure that we are able to leverage everything that's coming from the federal on down with the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the other policies that have come out of Washington to make sure that we're standing in line and ready to do whatever we can as a community and as a utility, leverage those dollars to do the positive things that we're intended to do. So if we put under other, the weatherization and incentivization on heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and weatherization as a thing, I would be happy to see that and move that forward.
So just one, do you mind if I jump in?
Fine.
Sorry. Just a point of clarification that I'd like to get from commissioners, given that this is about a meeting with the City of Eugene.
Yes.
Is that we have all those incentives that you've mentioned, and we have a pretty robust weatherization program. So in response, relative to the City of Eugene, I'm just, and by the way, I will make sure that the results of the various components of that get in the year-end report, so we can see how much is rentals, how much is owner occupied, and those kinds of things. But I'm curious what the ask is for the City of Eugene. Because as far as I know, they have a pretty significant budget deficit. We're talking about incentives. And is that just us going, oh, we're going to incentivize this more, which then has some other budget implications? So I'm trying to clarify what the ask is of the City of Eugene, because we Now, granted, there's ways that we need to progress these programs, and those are going to be really important decisions that we make in the context of things like the IRP that you mentioned and some of the other things. So what is the cost of that? What's the opportunity cost to do other things? But relative to this particular subject, I guess would ask for some clarification, really, for President Carlson and Vice President Borowski, what the ask is.
So for me, what I would hope to bring out of this would be leveraging that partnership, saying, okay, we have these programs in place. How can we leverage that to get more funding to these programs, whether that's from the city of Eugene, whether that's working collaboratively with them and saying, hey, a percentage of our silt increases could go, instead of just going into the general fund and being split out, could be dedicated to funding more of these programs, letting them know that we would be willing to take on the administrative part of it since we are already doing it, but that we can make them aware of those types of things so that they can bake that into their climate reduction goals, and so that to help them meet their targets, saying, hey, we want to meet the targets. We want to help you meet the targets. Part of that's going to be financial. We're already doing some financial things. If you throw us $1, you don't have to begin the wheel all over again. We have these programs in place and we can help do it. And by using some of your money, we can leverage that to go a lot further. That's one of my ideas. I don't know.
Frank, I know what I don't know, and I'd like to find out how SMUD did it. If they did it. I mean, I'd like to, before we turn around and say, okay, we don't know how to do this or anything, we have a great weatherization program, but if other entities have been able to crack that glass ceiling about getting money into the rental, reach out. And if it's already been done, that's good, but I'm not aware of how if they've done it, if they were successful. I was told it was a very successful program. Let's check out some other utilities and see what the trend is and see if we can learn from them before I say, I know the city's got a challenge financially, but can't just ignore this need.
Right. One quick second. So is that something that we could do? Could reach out to SMUD and have a
Sure.
or could we do that before our next? When are we set up to have the meeting? First. Okay, so we won't be able.
I don't know about the March 1st. I do know that.
We can set the table though at March 1st.
We have a good relationship with SMUD, and we actually invited them up here. I think maybe you were involved with some of their discussions with our staff a few years ago, specifically around limited income programs. That's where we had, but we have contacts at SUB. We can reach out. That's on my list of action items to go through.
Right. I don't know if this is like dreaming too big or overstepping our bounds, but I would just like to work with them collaboratively. Like ideas that have been floated out there before are kind of making it so that when you advertise the price of rent for a home or an apartment, that you have to include the average price of the utilities. And that's not something that we could do, but the city could enact something like that so that when renters go to rent a place, they know how much the utilities cost. And then perhaps that would put a little bit more pressure on landlords than to opt into some of our incentive programs and weatherization. So that's like one thing that the city could do. I don't know what the other things are, but maybe to kind of have that discussion to think creatively, what could they
Along that point, is there a way, so I'm assuming that somebody would call and ask for the previous month's or maybe an average usage over a certain time period? Is that available to?
That's a service that we provide, yes.
So they could get that pretty easily and then post it.
It's not a requirement though. Carlos, I know the city has had a number of discussions about home energy scores and potentially requiring that. I don't know where they are in that conversation.
And do we still support the SCORE program? Because that was actually my next question. You know, they had home audits and that was kind of done in a partnership with the city and so.
That's fine, but like when people are looking to rent a place, like actually dollar amounts, I think is useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just curious kind of separately if they still support that program, if that's something that is happening. Sounds like we have these items we can kind of give updates on, but really we want to focus on this. We've got some really good ideas. Thank you, commissioners, for the specifics, because that's what I see when we've had these meetings in the past. We say, we'd like to work on this. And then we've kind of had a couple of things and then we're like, oh yeah, that's great. But then it's not specific enough. So I really appreciate the conversation tonight around specific asks.
One more thing, and I may ask Frank about this. Seeing how that there was a council motion last night to ban new gas infrastructure into new residential, is that something that, I mean, we can just put that out that we're a resource for data and information on the energy sector or what, I don't know. I mean, it's a community interest. I think it's going to start boiling up a little bit more now that ordinance passed. So again, what's your feeling on bringing that conversation into the liaison? Or our role in that?
I think what we need to make sure that the city is constantly aware of is that we are a resource for them and have an area of expertise that they don't necessarily have. And they have expertise that we don't have as well. And I think reiterating that is important.
Yeah. I would leave it at that. I think that's good. Just letting them know they can pick up the phone and get an expert. Dial a nurse.
I have 6 action items walking away from this conversation, just so you all know. So
Close this conversation.
This was supposed to be a board discussion. Thank you very much. So there's a few things that are actually very timely. These are not action items we were taking on separately. Next month, as part of our initial release of the climate guidebook, there will be an update in that as to our contribution to CAP 2.0. And so what results are we responsible for? Some of the graphs that have been reported on the CAP 2.0 in the past, we're working with city staff to get those updated with our data. Because those deal with energy efficiency and some of those other things. So that's coming next month. As well as our end of the year report, which has results from all across our energy efficiency and limited income programs. So you'll be able to dial in and see, I mean, I can tell you historically rentals has been 16 to 18% of our residential energy efficiency. That's historic. I don't know where we finished the year, but that's the kind of data that you'll see next month. So this is very timely. We will reach out to SMUD and compare notes. We have a lot of contacts there. We're also, as you know, in the midst of the IRP, and we've had some discussions around various sensitivities associated with the IRP. One of those is accelerated electrification. And so when one of the messages really is, relative to that particular ordinance is we are going to test what that does with our selection of resources. Accelerated that type of electrification, we have to dial in the kind of consumption that's going to be, which is a heating load. So, and we've had a number of discussions around the details of how you model that, but these, and then also I'll get with our grant clearinghouse group relative to opportunities associated with the IIJA and the IRA that you mentioned as far as additional funding. So I think we're doing a lot of those things. These are very timely. All these action items are things that we're doing anyway, and hopefully they will I can stage this in a way that helps the president and the vice president communicate with the city. I don't think I missed anything.
And then,
So just feedback, you said you're gonna circle with SMUD and compare notes there. I'm hearing interest at the board level in hearing from SMUD. Am I hearing that right? I think somebody suggested having them, or maybe it was you, having them come in and talk with us. Is that something we want to do at the board level, or are we just thinking staff compare notes? I'm just checking.
I thought we were asking at the board level to have them come and talk, but I'd be.
That's what I heard from you. Yeah.
We have head nods for that?
So you want us to invite SMUD, they're a lot closer.
I think that would be valuable. I don't, I think it's, as we work into our IRP and we're thinking more about, additional need for conservation or new power, probably there's a bigger conversation about what kind of conservation we aim to acquire. So I don't know if that has to happen next month, but perhaps from my perspective, as part of our conversation about the IRP over the next 6 months, I think that'd be valuable.
Where it does flow in well with the IRP is that the July or the first release of the IRP will have a series of actions associated with that. And I could see actually that being one of the actions to do some assessments around that.
John?
Is there a way, you do your outreach because you speak at this level and probably at this level, and then we could have a Zoom to give us a view, and we could, if we have questions after what you get, we could actually question the people that are giving us a presentation, and given the technology available, we could, that way we could interact with them and say, well, what about this? Or what, maybe there's a question that we have. I would say if we could do that, I think that would be a good use of 15 or 12 agenda time.
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways we can do that.
Thanks. I think we're done in this item. All right, great. We will move on to the climate guidebook draft principles. Ready? I just realized that March 1st is when our sun is supposed to be, but I will be with Jason in Washington, DC. So we'll have to figure out how we're going to do that meeting.
You make up for it by bringing back some of that Inflation Reduction Act. It's just laying around on the streets out there.
Where it is. Just on the streets.
Okay. Give me a moment. I'm going to acclimate myself to the clicker. Okay, good evening, everyone. For the record, I'm Jason User, the Public Policy and Government Affairs Director at EWEB. I'll let my colleague Kelly introduce herself.
Kelly Hale. I'm the Climate Policy Analyst and Advisor here at EWEB.
All right, it's great to be with you all this evening to talk about the proposed draft principles for inclusion in the upcoming proposed climate guidebook that Kelly's been so hard at work right now on. First slide, just as a scene setter, just want to give you a quick refresh of the elements of the climate guidebook. It's a reference documents to articulate all the activities that EWEB is involved in with climate change. Think of it as the one-stop shopping center for all the information you could possibly need about all of the key core areas, initiatives we have at EWEB on climate change. And as you know, you'll be getting a first look at the initial draft of that document at the March board meeting. Again, in the refresher department, just a quick rundown on the elements of the climate change policy SD15 that the handbook will be focusing in on. Core areas including climate policy, power supply and transmission, customer decarbonization, resiliency, and carbon reductions in EWEB operations. And this slide just further elaborates a little bit with the evolution of that document. And I think this demonstrates these principles are a lens through which the work on meeting the goals in the climate change policy can be viewed through. These principles can provide guidance, alignment, consistency, evolution, and transparency
towards the fulfillment of the goals in the climate change policy. I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of principles. What are they for? I think the staff that worked on them, we all agreed, we think of them along the lines of a North Star, a framework of sorts, not really a rule book, but that kind of North Star that lets you know if you're moving in the right direction towards positive changes, charting that right kind of course. Those principles also assist EWEB in assessing whether programs and policies are aligned with aspirations. If alignment is lacking, the principles can serve as a guide for us to determine what kind of barriers are in the way, how those barriers might be solved, and what's a reasonable time frame to move towards alignment. And I think I would say, well, let me pause for a moment, just real quickly, the topic areas for the principles that are before you tonight are here: carbon policy and GHG reduction, distributed generation, green hydrogen, and these may not be the last principles. It's very possible there'll be future iterations of other principles. We know the energy world, the electricity sector is constantly changing. It's very much possible there'll be other sets of principles that we may find helpful to guide us through that uncertain future. And let me back up for a moment. I think one thing I would like to point out is what you see in front of you. I don't think there's a lot that's new. And by that, I mean, some of these elements in these policies have been refined a little bit, but they draw upon documents the board has adopted in the past, usually through our annual adopted legislative agenda. For example, the carbon principles certainly are things that should feel pretty familiar to you because you've seen them in our legislative agendas. They've been the operating instructions you've given me as I've marched off to sail on to be part of work groups on things like cap and trade, for example. I think maybe that's a more explicit example of these not being new. There's also maybe an implicit example of things that are not new in the distributed generation principles. I would say what's in those principles, for example, probably encapsulate conversations that this board, the general manager, and staff have had for as far back as 15 years when we first started to see customer interest in self-generation. And so it's not new. It's probably the first time it's ever really been written down in a single place, would be how I would describe that. And some of the other elements might be a little more nascent, but there's quite a bit, quite a few of the elements in these draft principles is not new stuff. The first topic area, draft carbon policy. I will probably spend the least time on this one because, again, I think this one probably is the most familiar to you. There's multiple principles. I won't read them all, but to concisely encapsulate them, typically we've supported things that were technology neutral, economy-wide, and market-based, and the least cost policies for reducing carbon at the goals scientists tell us are necessary to arrest and reverse climate change. And I would say we also have not done this stuff in a vacuum. We have had great partners in the utility sector. I think there are a lot of like-minded utilities that we've collaborated with on best practices for decarbonization. Some of the examples of those utilities include Snohomish PUD. We've just been fortunate enough to get one of their employees now down here in Eugene, Seattle City Light, Tacoma Power. And in fact, we've collaborated with those utilities on some deep dive analysis into decarbonization policy. You'll recall that we were co-sponsors with those utilities as well as other members of the Public Generating Pool, a consortium of publicly owned utilities that own some of their own generation. We made investments to bring on a top team at the E3 consulting firm, which they conducted a least cost decarbonization policy study, as well as a decarbonization reliability study for us. So we consulted with other utilities on best practices, and we've also put investments into analysis But I think it's proved very valuable for us. And there's lessons learned from that analysis that are encapsulated in these draft principles. Distributed generation. I've talked about this already a little bit. I think that this encapsulates a lot of institutional memory about how EWEB has approached distributed generation. We have a lot of enthusiasm at this organization for customer choice to support customers that want to self-generate. And we also have a lot of enthusiasm for fairness in recovering the fixed costs of the grid and the utility. And I think I probably, by benefit of being at EWEB for the last 15 years, was able to, I think, capture that institutional memory. But to ensure this wasn't a dated view, I did convene a work group of EWEB staff, including new people, fresh blood, fresh perspectives. And we actually walked through these principles. And it's not just a history lesson. I think people felt like the principles were very sound and totally up to date for a contemporary approach to customer generation. Oh, and I just did, to put a finer note on this, I also wanted to point out that a lot of what you see in the draft principles on distributed generation formed the testimony that I've given in the past in Salem when there have been legislative efforts to preempt local decision-making on distributed generation. For example, there was a bill, I believe probably 2015, that created a statewide one-size-fits-all standard for net metering. It had some other attached policies on there about what utilities would be mandated to do as far as handling distributed generation on their system. And these principles, I think, pretty much encapsulate the testimony I provided to give the Legislative Committee in Salem confidence that our local elected officials are best situated to determine the needs of the communities and balance fairness in supporting customer choice, but also supporting the equitable cost recovery from our customers. And I have to say, I think the committee found our testimony very compelling. I think it inspired confidence that local control is doing balancing those interests. The next set of principles are the green hydrogen principles. These are slightly more nascent. I would say that makes sense because it's a nascent technology. It's probably a good time to discuss principles on hydrogen because there's recently been a community conversation that has bubbled up asking questions about what is the best use of hydrogen in various sectors of the economy and whether or not it's an appropriate fit for the gas sector. So it's an appropriate time to identify some starting principles and very likely could be subject to evolution as we learn more about the technology of hydrogen. Again, it's a very nascent area. And I think that concludes my remarks. Our goal tonight was to inspire a conversation between commissioners. We hope this jumpstarts a conversation that provides feedback for staff. We're going to do our best to listen and very much welcome you to have that conversation with each other about these principles, how you feel about them, and whether or not they feel very representational of the organization. And I'm sorry, I do want to just pause. The benefit of having a buddy up here is that if you've missed something that's really, really important in the presentation, you've got a buddy who can point that out. Kelly, was there anything you wanted to add or anything that you think I might have missed?
You did excuse me, you did a fantastic job. I would just say that I'm excited to hear the conversation tonight. You know, the board's governance role is to set the values of the organization. We hope we captured the intent of those values and these principles. And we know that we seek to include these in the climate guidebook. We wanted to give you a preview of that and hope to take any feedback back and make those revisions by the time you see this again in March. So.
All right, great, thank you. I can jump in. Oh, okay.
I was just, well, thank you. And I'm excited that we're going to have this climate guidebook. I would say what would be helpful to me is a refresher or a tutorial specifically on distributed generation, also based on public testimony tonight about how there might be new types of distributed, maybe not generation, but storage and what that would look like. And also on green hydrogen. So I know that these are things that we've touched on in previous meetings, but as somebody who this is not my everyday world, I'm not up to date on everything, and I think it would be really helpful to have just a tutorial or something, or just an information presentation on different topics. So that way I can but the area where I need more information.
Oh, okay.
You can help me with this. The last bullet point, that incorporate concepts of environmental justice and equity and to avoid negative impacts to historically and currently disadvantaged. Can you help me understand who makes that list of what is a disadvantaged community, and who defines disadvantage and who defines community, and the difference between historically and community and currently? And so that those things contradicted for me, but I just want to know how, if we're going to adopt a policy that goes, make sure that we address that. I need to know what we're addressing. So, rather than a general statement, I understand the concept, but if into it, if you can help me understand that, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
I don't have the definition handy. Do you want to?
Yeah, so the intent behind including that bullet on each of the principles is to bring concepts of equity into all of the work that we do as the utility, right? And I recognize that those words, the key words that are included in that bullet, need definition. And that's what we plan to bring to you all in the April work session. So there is a plan to bring a longer discussion of that, but the intent behind using that particular language is that that's how the federal government is defining that concept in terms of how they're assigning funding under the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's an initiative spearheaded by the federal government called the Justice 40 Initiative, and it has a specific definition for a disadvantaged community at DAC, and that is how they are defining this concept of equity and looking at how some impacts from project level work has impacted certain communities more negatively than others. And so the federal government seeks to have 40% of the IRA funding flow to those historically disadvantaged communities, and they have specific definitions that are associated with that. And so the language used in these principles will provide, we will bring additional education on what that actually means, and we can discuss that as part of that potential development for an EWEB DEI policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. But the reason that that language was included this way is to be in alignment with that federal program.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll jump in. So the principles, the first one to me is really about policies. Second one seems to be about empowering customers. And the third one somehow stands out to me. I mean, just it's focused on one particular piece of technology. When we think about our IRP, we have battery pop to the top, not green hydrogen. So it kind of feels strange to me that this is one that's now a principle, when to me it would feel like maybe it's our own mix of energy, and maybe, how we think about the mix of energy that we have, and maybe green hydrogen is a part of that. But all of the work we've done with the IRP, with battery storage and some of the things that are popping to the top were fuel switching. I mean, fuel switching is a big part of what we've talked about. And when I go out in the community, putting money into infrastructure and incentivizing more EVs, that's been more of a part of what I think of. So I don't know, for me, the green hydrogen seemed sort of out of place. So if you could describe to me why that one was a principle above all the other ones, that would be helpful for me to understand.
I'll take the first stab at it, and then I think Kelly can fill in what I know. There is definitely a conversation, I think both locally, but also at the statewide level, about what's the most efficient way to use hydrogen and where can it be used earlier than other places. And there was even a presentation at the House Energy Committee in Salem a few days ago, where the Oregon Department of Energy shared some information from some of the national subject matter experts on hydrogen. And I forget, was it the wheel of hydrogen or the ladder of hydrogen?
There are both, but
There's
the
both.
particular one that I think you're talking about is the hydrogen ladder, that certain applications are more appropriate. You know, that's in the eye of the beholder. There's people who can argue that, but some people say that there are some uses of hydrogen that are have fewer alternatives and therefore should be of higher priority as we look to decarbonize.
Kelly covered it very well. Essentially, I think there's a question about, again, how much hydrogen can be scaled up? It's obviously still very nascent. What's the best place to use it early on? Again, where there may not be good alternatives. It's difficult to directly electrify. So I think these principles are trying to get at that. And again, I will stress, these are definitely the most nascent. I think this is probably the third time I've said nascent in regard to hydrogen. This is a starting place, and it wouldn't surprise me for these principles to evolve in ways that the other two might not, which I think are probably two more subtle sets.
So how are these principles being used then? Is this something for you to use as you go to Salem, or is it something that, you know, we are developing a guide, like how are these going to be used? I think that's.
So conceptually, if I think I understand the concept behind your question, right? You're asking, these three things are not all exactly the same, right? You mentioned policy, you mentioned empowering customers, and you mentioned this brand new technology, right? And so conceptually, the way I'm thinking about principles is these are an articulation of why EWEB is involved in the topic, right? So they are going to be different. They're not all policy, even though you'll find them here in the policy section of the climate guidebook, but they're all related to climate change, which is why they're being included in the guidebook. And they all are principles that to help us all get on the same page of why EWEB is involved with them, right? And so it's really just setting out a list of, this is why EWEB cares about this topic, and these are the directions, whether it's advocating for a policy in Salem or, you know, even with the federal government, or in a completely different case, how is EWEB going to advocate for a particular technology and why? And what are the guiding sets of principles that we want to follow as we think about how does hydrogen relate to an electric utility, right? And where does it fit in? And how do we think about that conceptually? Or how do we set a solar program, for example, when we get a lot of questions? What are the principles or the guiding North Star concepts that we want to make sure are represented when we create a program for something that's related to a particular topic? So they're not all related to things that Jason's going to be advocating for in Salem or in Washington, D.C. But they are all topics that we care about as a utility that relate to climate change, and that we need to list out why we're involved in them and make sure that from a values perspective, the board and staff are in alignment. And it helps articulate then to our customers why we're getting involved in that, or why we're not, potentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I mean, for why are we doing principles specifically? I think I still would like to maybe have a discussion with the board about, are these the right principles? That's the question for me.
One other concept I think was related to your question. These are not designed, like the fact that we picked these three topics first doesn't mean they're more important than anything else, right? It means that these were areas where we wanted to start. Where we had already started articulating some of these things, as Jason was mentioning, you know, we have already been following the carbon policy principles in many ways. He's already, you know, advocated for policy in accordance with these, and we've already worked with other like-minded utilities in some of those areas. So this is just really an articulation and a place to have them in a common place so that we can all refer back to them. Hydrogen is new, and because of that, there are some people who are asking questions about our involvement in local projects or other areas of potential opportunity for us. And so we thought, let's start there and just get something down on paper, but it's certainly not intended to say this is where it's going to stop. That concept of future topics, there can be a lot of additional topics that we could add over time.
If I could just add, I would say, I think the principles for me, they ultimately are a basis upon which we make decisions about positions, certainly in my vein of work. And I think that's really important because it lends consistency to the positions we take. And I think consistency is a really important part of the credibility of our advocacy. It helps us a lot be effective with external audiences.
Okay, one last comment, then I'll move to Frank. So, I mean, I guess calling it a principle from, especially on the green hydrogen side, it feels like we haven't come around to have a solution that would necessitate a principle. So that's where, for me, calling it a principle, not information on this topic, it's kind of a distinguisher there. But maybe I'll let Frank, and then I'd like to hear from the other board members.
Thanks, President Carlson. I was going to elaborate a little bit more on the fact that with SD 15, the board directed the utility to take a position on policy that helped improve our greenhouse gas position. I'll summarize it that way. The next step is, what's that look like? What's that mean? And Jason, for example, is applying some of these already, and he has to go into this and for consistency, we do feel it's important that we have some basis to answer that question. What's it mean for carbon policy? What's it mean for some of these things which are emerging? You look local, state, federal, hydrogen is a topic. It's part of the funding mechanisms. What's our position? Why are we interested? So these are meant as guideposts to answer that question, because as a board, you've said, go out and advocate for policy that supports a reduction of greenhouse gases. So that's part of developing principles. The opposite of principles is to just get into every single piece of legislation or discussion that ever happened, and that will be really unproductive, and it will drive us all crazy, because there's so many discussions going on at the same time that these are meant to provide a sort of a guiding light to that. There will be all kinds of other principles that we talk about relative to the climate guidebook. I was in a meeting all day Friday on nuclear technology. You want to talk about something where we would have to develop some principles around? That's probably one of them. That's, what's our position on Snake River dams? I mean, this is the beginning of some that we felt like were in use at the moment and made sense to start with, but it's not where it's going to end.
Okay.
Well, so first I want to say thanks for engaging us at this level of conversation. I feel like the principles is exactly where we should be operating. And the thinking that's here is familiar and makes sense to me. I share your thought about the green hydrogen piece in terms of being it's very different, right, than the other two. And in fact, there's almost some kind of nesting quality to them. They're not necessarily all distinct, right? It does feel like there are a handful of kind of overarching principles that apply to all three of these that I would propose. And one is the desire to leverage state and federal funds to the greatest extent possible. But I know we all want to do that, and I think having that written down would be useful. I think anticipating and supporting an increasing proportion of electricity generated by intermittent renewables, right? I think we're going that way. And if we want to just say that, like, we're going to anticipate and support, those things that help us go that direction. But I'd be interested if there's other thoughts among the board or staff on that. Technologies or investments that anticipate changes in climate. I think, again, I think we're all on board for these things. I'm just saying that maybe they'd be useful to be written down as principles as well. And lastly, anticipate and support growing rates of electrification in buildings and transportation. Yeah, it's all consistent with what we're doing, but could be useful to write down. And then, I have a handful of thoughts in each of the different categories that I'm happy to share, but maybe I'll stop there.
I'm gonna tag on with Mindy about the need for education on green hydrogen. So when you say green hydrogen, does that mean hydrogen is generated from methane or natural gas? Is that what being part of green hydrogen means?
No fossil fuel.
No fossil fuels. Okay. Yes.
There are evolving definitions that are coming in state and federal policy, but generally the concept is that you would use renewables and you would have zero carbon emissions from the energy that would go into the production of the hydrogen. And that's different from the way 95% of the hydrogen made in the United States is today, which is based on fossil fuel.
So, yeah, I think being able, and that's a long explanation, and green hydrogen, I don't want us to get into the same thing that happened when people started talking about renewable natural gas and the stigma that came with that. I'm all in favor of electrolyzed hydrogen, right? And using surplus renewable power to create hydrogen. I wouldn't be leaning into using natural gas to make hydrogen to burn. So being able to articulate that in a way that, when we say green, having a little asterisk or a footnote as to what green means when you're referring to green hydrogen would be helpful so that people understand that, because like say if 95% of the hydrogen that's being made today is being made using fossil fuels, then people will just say, well, you're just changing one fossil fuel into a different type of combustible fuel. And so
it's actually for that exact reason that we developed these principles, is to differentiate hydrogen generally towards something that actually is a low cycle carbon impact, right? And that's the first bullet under the hydrogen principles, is to get at that. We're trying to stay technology agnostic, right? Because just because there is a particular technology on the market that usually today that results in the lowest life cycle carbon emissions, it doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. So we're just trying to say we want low carbon hydrogen, and that's what we mean by green. And there are policy definitions that are coming out about what that actually means, but we're trying to say that for the purposes of EWEB, we want to, if we are looking into hydrogen, we want to support low carbon hydrogen.
And then the other thing Commissioner Brown's comment made me think, so if impacted community has the definition at the federal government, how many impacted communities do we have in Eugene Spring? Because, let's say that, is it economic? Is it racial? How is that defined? Because I'll put it out there, we're in a white state, right? And if economically impacted means people of color or those types of things, 40% of that money is going to go to communities. So I'm just wondering, is it a census tract thing that we use? So, I know that there's a census tract for HUD. Is it go in line with that, or?
So there are tools, and the Justice 40 Initiative has a mapping tool that allows you to look at your community and actually select different criteria. So it could look at economically disadvantaged, it could look at racially disadvantaged, it could look at overburdened from pollution. And there are different criteria, and you can look at those different criteria and look at where those populations live in your community. And then if you're doing a particular project or asking for funding for a particular grant, you can explain what you're doing and how the funding is going to address those historic communities that are disadvantaged in different ways. Does that make sense?
It does, and it just would be interesting to see where we land as far as how impacted our community is as opposed to nationwide.
Mr. I was just going to mention that the Oregon Department of Energy has a community energy and resiliency program, renewable energy and resiliency program, and they recently made an award to the city of Salem. And part of the city of Salem's application included criteria to benefits to disadvantaged communities. And so we probably could pull up or ask the city of Salem about their application, because I would say the city of Salem is not radically different from Eugene. I'm sure it's a little different, but it's a similar sized city in the Mid-Willamette Valley. It's very possible we might glean some insight from a comparable community.
Well, one of the areas you were speaking earlier about where can we partner with the city of Eugene, this is actually one of the areas where I feel like each individual organization in our community should not reinvent this wheel. There are tools that are out there, and there can be coordinated adoption of different definitions and how we want to think about it. There is a group called the Equity and Community Consortium in our community that EWEB is part of, as well as many of the same Eugene Climate Collaborative members that are part of the city's CAP 2.0 process. And there could be work done to educate all of us on how are we thinking about these concepts, how are we adapting definitions, and how are we not reinventing the wheel so that everybody has a different definition, but having community alignment on how we're talking about these things and how we're going after federal funding. Frank, did you?
I was just going to add, that well, we can get into the definitions, and I think there's tools to drill down in that. I think when you're talking at a principles level, the goal there is to ensure that the positions that we're taking are not having unintended consequences or excluding certain parts of our customer base. And I think that's why you have these in principle, is to make sure you're looking at your customer base holistically. And so, using some of the terminology that's going into federal language, I think helps to kind of ensure and go to the next steps. But really starting to include this kind of language and is a way of saying we want to be inclusive with our customers and ensure that we're not taking positions that leave people behind for a particular reason.
Thanks. So on the green hydrogen principles, in the greenhouse gas reduction principles, one of them is to be technology agnostic. And I would suggest that perhaps for the hydrogen, I think most of our interest in hydrogen is really around storage, right? I mean, we're not, if someone's making hydrogen for transportation uses or otherwise, like they might use our water and electricity, but we're not really doing that, at least not yet. Right.
Part of it.
Maybe I'll just finish my thought and then, which is that I think that with the green hydrogen, really what we're talking about largely is storage. And I think if you took out the word hydrogen and put in storage for all of those principles, then to me, it makes more sense in terms of being more comprehensive, less selecting an individual technology. I have every reason to believe that hydrogen is going to be an important part of us getting off of fossil fuels, but it's not clear when and how and exactly at what level it gets in the mix. And I think if we thought about storage more broadly, including green hydrogen, but also looking at other storage, it might be a more comprehensive set of principles that might be more flexible and get us where we want to go at a lower cost.
While we're on, since you mentioned storage, if I could, Mr. I will point out when we had the staff work group that vetted the principles, we actually did get to Chris's point earlier on storage. We did say, these kind of focus on customer generation. We probably do need to make these more inclusive of a future where customers will have not only on-site generation of their own, but also some of their own storage. And there's actually some interesting things to learn from Portland General Electric, which has a smart storage program for customers. So we've got some people in the region we can help learn from there. I think that's probably an area where there might be a little refinement to make the distributed generation principles a little more inclusive of storage, which probably is batteries.
Just to add that under the hydrogen, we are getting a lot of questions from our customers about how can hydrogen help with resiliency to disasters? How can hydrogen help with customer decarbonization, especially among the industrial sector where they're looking at, hard to decarbonize industrial processes and fuel switching. We're getting questions about what is EWEB's role and why would we get involved in different projects. We're getting a lot of questions, and you all might get questions from the community about our role in the Northwest Natural Project. We are a water and electricity supplier in most of these projects. There might be opportunities for us to collaborate at, a next level higher in some projects. With the Northwest Natural Project that has now been tabled, but previously we were willing to look at property and providing property in that particular instance. There might be other opportunities where we could collaborate, and there might be additional benefits for the utility to get learning on a new technology and find out how the technology could support other EWEB interests related to use of intermittent renewables, storage, customer decarbonization, and resiliency specifically. So that's why it wasn't just focused on storage, but it was trying to get at the technology and its place for an electric utility slightly more broadly than just storage.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So maybe there's some other principles around storage that are going to be looked at in the next round. I don't know. It does feel like, I hear what you're saying. Like there's opportunities there. It just feels like most of our engagement there is more around the storage of water and electricity. But like, are we thinking about becoming a hydrogen provider? Is that something we would contemplate?
There's two categories, I think, sort of broad categories of why we would be interested in hydrogen. One you mentioned is storage, and storage facilitates the resiliency piece that Kelly talked about, and also what I would call local grid support, where as a form of distributed generation, demand response, however you want to use it, that's a use of storage. The other really big category I think is going to become more and more important to the electricity sector is it creates a secondary market when you have renewables on the market producing and you don't want to curtail them. What do you do with that energy? And one of the opportunities is to create hydrogen, both as a means of actually facilitating investment in more renewables, so it helps the electricity sector, but also helps other sectors. And we could look at it in a number of ways where we could actually produce hydrogen potentially for our own local grid support or for a third-party use. And that particular reason probably a ways down the road. There's some other things that would have to happen in the meantime, which is really driving the economics of it. It's not something that you would probably see in an IRP today because of that. But the way scale works and the way that a lot of these opportunities are being identified federally, especially, is designed to drive the economics. So storage is one and secondary market is the other, is how I'd classify those.
I note that we're out of time, but we're still ahead of schedule. So if we'd like to extend it, it seems like there might be a couple more. I just want some head nods if we want to keep going. Okay, I see some head nods. Okay, we'll keep going.
Okay, so just to reiterate, my request for more information for the board and also a general request, maybe not just for this climate guidebook, but when we look at the IRP and we talk about basic technology, that I think it would be helpful for the board to have on that technology, so that we all have an understanding of what we're talking about before we're asked to get behind something. And not that we're trying to get into the weeds, but I just think it would for us, at least understand the terminology or the scale of what we're talking about.
Right, Brown?
Regarding the hydrogen, I'm all for sticking with what we have because if we've got a byproduct, we've got more water than we know what to do with. We have renewable energy that we give away at night. We should be farming off to California for the wind farms. We've got a site next to a high transmission line. We've got a site next to a gas line. I don't want to not identify that because even if it doesn't produce electricity, our byproduct can reduce the transportation sector, especially the diesel and the heavy trucks and the buses and things like that. So I'm all for sticking with what you have and not taking it away. I like the specifics of it because even if we don't generate electricity or serve our customers, the byproduct of what we have, instead of us shipping our wind power to California and giving it away, let's use it here and make hydrogen and cut the diesel out of the local sectors. So I think it's not just everything we do doesn't have to benefit on EWEB's ledger. It can be somebody else's ledger and help reduce the carbon because we know where transportation is. It's it's right there below coal. And we can help knock it off. Let's knock it off.
Right, my last comment, I mean, kind of along the storage line, I was talking about, think about benefit of hydrogen is actually enhancing renewables. How do we make renewables that are more variable into a more viable usage for us to fill in those gaps and make that line more predictable so we can match our needs, our energy needs to it. So for me, it's kind of an extension of along those lines, if we're thinking about storage, how do we use batteries to make renewables more usable for us? I mean, that's how I think about it, but anyway. Okay, anything? Okay, great.
Yeah, thanks. And I know we're trying to wrap up here. So just a couple more thoughts on the overall, the greenhouse gas reduction principles. One of the principles that I think would be beneficial to add is in prioritizing policies that have a positive impact on bills regardless of rates. Right, we often get sucked into the rates conversation, and I think it'd be valuable for us to continually remind ourselves that we're thinking about bills and not just rates.
When you say that, are you meaning customer bills or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that as we're thinking about greenhouse gas reduction, we're not just focused on how the investments or policies we'd be looking at are affecting the rates, but we're thinking also about, or especially about, how it affects customer bills overall. And then on the statement around incorporating concepts of environmental justice, I appreciate that you're connecting that to the federal language around this, and I think that's super valuable, and thank you for doing that. My sense is that in our territory and especially with what we're providing, that really we're looking at lower income households and rentals primarily as the populations that are most underserved by our utility and left most vulnerable. So I guess I would suggest that perhaps we include not only that we're trying to protect from negative impacts, but also that we're making targeted investments in homes occupied by families that are lower income and homes occupied by renters, which again, they're things that I think we've all talked about, but to me it would be valuable to bake into principles. And then just a point of clarification, I certainly wasn't advocating to get rid of or not pay attention to hydrogen or not invest in that. I was just looking to kind of broaden that category a little bit to include hydrogen, but also other storage. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to McKenzie Valley meeting planning.
Thank you. I'm not sure where we landed on that one. We'll talk about it, see where we go with that one.
Okay.
Meeting has been recorded.
I'm glad.
Does it know?
Because I was taking notes pretty feverishly. So thank you, President Carlson. Good evening again, commissioners. This is an opportunity to gauge your input on an upcoming annual event that we have typically in the spring, sometimes it's been in the fall, and wanted to get a facilitated discussion with you around desired response, outcomes, goals. We wanted to talk about the objectives of the meeting, topics of interest, the format, the responsibilities, roles and responsibilities, and how that's going to work this year. A little bit ahead of time. It is May 16th, so we wanted to have the opportunity to work with the board over the next few months to get ready for that, and make that valuable for both you and the people of the McKenzie Valley. Won't talk too much about this, other than there's various ways that we can look at the outcomes and the purposes, whether it's to share information, build partnerships, look at developing plans or decisions, gathering feedback. There's a lot of different reasons that we go to the McKenzie Valley and work with the people up there who are our customers and have been really throughout our history. Someone asked me the other day about how do we get a territory up there, and it actually started up there. You know, Eugene, all the way connected to the McKenzie Valley, was EWEB's territory, including Springfield, and then it splintered off a little bit, but that's been our history with that, with the people of the McKenzie Valley, as well as as you know, we have a lot of infrastructure in McKenzie Valley, and we rely on the McKenzie River for our drinking water source. A few potential topics of interest. Some of these, in fact, all of these, I think would probably be familiar to you and the people in that part of our service territory. But really just wanted to facilitate a discussion this evening around what you are looking for out of that meeting, what you think the people of the Valley would want to hear about, and get your feedback on responsibilities, your roles and responsibilities, as well as staff's and meeting format and things to make this the most productive, engaging meeting that we can. So with that, President Carlson, I'll just turn it back to you and listen.
Okay. So for our desired response, what do we want the customers to learn or know? I think ahead of time, we should ask the upriver residents what they want to learn or know. And reach out through a variety of different people and organizations to ask them what they want from us. I don't know if we've done that before, but I think that could be really helpful. Also, maybe discussing with the county what they're hearing from up there, just to get more information so that not just us talking to people, but that we've solicited what they want ahead of time. I think that could be helpful. I feel like sometimes, I know that staff does a lot of preparation and all of the PowerPoint presentations and everything, but it just feels a little formal or stiff or something, or cold. And I think part of what we're trying to do is connect with the upriver residents and say, like, you know, we know that you're here and we want to hear you, and these are the things that we're doing up here. So I don't have anything specific, but maybe if it's, I don't know, it feels a little academic, I guess, with all the PowerPoint presentations. I don't know what the answer, but I'm just throwing that out there. I'll stop for now and let somebody else answer, and if I have something else, I'll. Okay.
I'll pick up on your point about presentations. I think to the extent that we can program in kind of open conversation time on the front and the back end of the meeting, so that there's less formal opportunity for less formal conversations with the attendees. I think that helps us reduce some of the kind of stuffiness that can come if it's all very formal presentation. And then in terms of topics of interest, my sense is that there's a recognition that we've made a fairly significant decision here, and I don't think, I'm sure we'll hear some frustration and expect that. But also, I think people are gonna be interested in knowing how, like, what are we gonna do to address the impacts that come with that? So I think, we're not gonna have all the answers, but to the best of our ability, coming to prepared to talk about road access, where the dam currently exists and what we think we might do with the space that's currently occupied by the canals. Things like that are going to be high on the list, but I appreciate Mindy's suggestion of reaching out. I bet Will could tell us the whole agenda right now. Anyway, so yeah, getting some feedback from Upriver is a great idea.
John?
I always get down into the weeds, not falls, I hate falls. Just make sure we have a table that, we got $3.5 million septic program that we just got granted. I understand, make sure people are aware of that new program up there because they can take advantage of it. We still have a generator program where we'll help people buy generators. Make sure that the tangible stuff that we do, that they're aware of it, because I got a feeling a lot of people aren't aware of that. And then maybe I want to really emphasize that the significance of pure water. That $4 million we just approved was for 232 PWP members. It's $16,000 a house for forestation, vegetation management, things like that. That's an incredible benefit. And let people know that there is a really good positive by joining up and helping do things like that. So make sure that we get into the weeds of some of that stuff that can really benefit them, and that we are we're trying to do the best we can with what we have.
Notwithstanding the decision that we made on Lieber, I think that we have probably the best positive recognition from the work that we've done upriver over the last few years. I think with Pure Water Partnership, stuff that we've done for after the Holiday Farm fire, the partnerships that we've had with the Mackenzie Watershed Council, and the engagement that we had upriver for the 2 years to make the decision on Lieberg, I think has put us in a position that I think a majority of the people upriver feel very positive about our utility. At least that's the feeling that I get. As far as meeting format, it might be good to see if Jared from Mackenzie Watershed Council could be one of the speakers on some of the good stuff that we have helped fund and put out there, rather than having staff, EWEB staff presenting it, have people from the Watershed Council that are up there on the ground, and have them talk about how Pure Watershed or PP, you know what I'm talking about, that the flood restoration, the work that we've done with the trust. If they see the people that they know that are coming up there and on the ground doing it, as opposed to an EWEB staff member doing some of the presentation, that may also help garner support for what we're doing. Because those people they're trusted. They know them. They see them in the river. They see them planning things. One of the things that we help do and that they've done is we give away firewood. We give away firewood to people up there. Firewood that came from the fires. The Watershed Council chops it up and leaves it in the school's parking lot, and people can just come and pick up firewood to help get them through the winter. Stuff like that really touches the people that are up there. And so I think that would be helpful if we could get some of our partners to help tell the story, rather than just us say, we spent this much, and we planted this many trees. That would be something I think would be helpful.
Go back one slide. Okay, so on the topics, I actually like some of the upfront presentations, because I think that there's a lot of people go there to get some education about the items, and I do back and forth, but I'm sure that these presentation answers a lot of questions. And it also gives them topics to ask more about during the discussionary period. So I don't know if there's maybe something we could do to focus a bit more instead of having so many items. 'Cause I know there's a lot of, I mean, when I look at these, they're all very important, so that makes it hard to to do. But I like what John Brown said about, making sure that they have an understanding about these other programs that are available to them too. And I know we don't have that as a kind of a topic item, but maybe to the extent that we could say, we have this information available, but we're going to focus on these kind of big topics. I mean, Lieberg is going to be a major one that they're going to want to have, okay, you made this decision, now what? And we're going into wildfire season, so I think that, might be on the kind of top of their minds too, because we'll at that point going into summertime, what else are we doing to make sure that, the power lines are safe? And are we doing more of the helicopter trimming and some of that work? So really making sure that we're kind of giving the updates quickly and providing that kind of key message, but allowing for the more robust discussion. So any of those that we think are going to be like big topics that will garner questions, maybe let's try to preemptively give a presentation on that, but then just say we have more, we can talk about these other topics too, or anything else that you'd like. That would be my recommendation to the extent we can. That's my 2 cents. And now we've given you differing structures here. So, I mean, I don't know if there's head nods there or if we want to, really just go back to limiting, having presentations versus not having presentations. We should probably give clear.
I'm not opposed to presentations at all. I just think that sometimes, like when you have them like one right after the other, I don't know, some of them could be maybe shorter, maybe a little less formal without the PowerPoint stuff. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but there's just so many things and it just feels like a little overwhelming actually to look at that. That's a really big list. So I guess I go back to maybe let's check in with the community there and see if there's some things that rise to the top and figure out a way to whittle this down a little bit.
I wasn't proposing this list. This was hey, here's a potential. So I've heard a few things that I think, first of all, some outreach to the community to see what their interests are. I think that's a good one. Solicit some community support. I do think there's some balance between, I'll call it sterile versus organic instead of, you called us stiff, but that's okay. Something a little bit more organic, whether that's the flow, having some more formal or informal mix that was referred to. And then having a balance, I think, between areas where people can go for a specific interest of theirs, making sure we have information on programs, septic programs, generator programs, individual emergency preparedness. I think having stations and the ability and time to interact is good, but then maybe balanced with a little bit of information that we think is more general. So we know we're going to be asked, where are you at with this Lieberg decision? You made the decision. Okay, where are you at with developing the action plan and how is that starting to come together? But I also agree that those are not long presentations. I think one of the things that we're starting to get better at with some of the neighborhood association meetings is getting to these points quickly. It's really, hey, here's what's going on with this. Here's what's going on with this. Next subject. Enough to inspire questions and interaction with our customers up there. And then potentially even having some guest speakers or, hey, here's some things to break it up a little bit. But a couple of times in the past, we've had guest speakers that sort of took, I'll say, moved the meeting away from the value that the board was supposed to get and the community was supposed to get. So we'd have to do some pretty good coaching on that one. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Is that consistent?
It's a suggestion. If I was trying to tighten up the schedule, I'd probably combine 1 and 2 into one topic, and I'd probably take 3 and 4 maybe off and put those table topics. And knowing that the majority of the people that are going to attend this are from the lower river, and that's where we're going to have the greatest impact in the next 5 to 10 years. Kind of do it that way, but still have information tables for wildfire mitigation, emergency preparedness, and Carmen Smith. I think the topics are going to be number 6.
And potentially pricing. Yeah, so we're actually going to talk about pricing in April, so right before that. Thank you. I will plan to reach out to some key residents and get some feedback. Potentially Lane Electric, who also operates up in that area, to see what they're hearing, and the county, I think, is a good one. So I appreciate the feedback. And
one more thing. I'm not going to be there at the next Kenzie Watershed Council, but we're presenting. So maybe, when we're there, just ask them if there's anything specific. Got staff there that's presenting on the bunch of different things. I think Lisa's great. So that's an opportunity. There's a lot of people in that room that touch the room.
If there's anything else that comes up between now and over the next month or two, save those for our check-ins or just reach out. So, feedback.
You move.
I got it.
Correspondence for agendas.
Commissioners, I'm going to start with the board agendas. There are a few things coming up outside of general monthly board meetings. We do have a town hall on the integrated resource plan on the 21st. Prior to that, we have one with some environmental groups the week before that as well. This one on the 21st is for the general public. It'll be here. We're starting to fill in a few things. One of the things that I did mention is that we're likely to pull up a pricing discussion into, is that April? And the Lieberg, to start having some discussions with you on whether we want to pre-fund some of that work or how we want to look at the pros and cons of when we have to start paying for that bill. So that'll be in April. And the rest of it is just starting to fill in, and we're starting to have a work session here as well. So, any questions on the agenda? I also kind of wanted to take this particular time and we've started to do a weekly, and I think Commissioner Brown provided some feedback around what's going on in the media and making sure that commissioners are up to speed on that. We're starting a weekly summary as to sort of here's all the things going on. Some of those are very specific outreach from EWEB. Some of them are externally driven coverage. If there is something where we feel that it's of immediate attention, something's coming out, we don't want any of you to be blindsided, we will do it sort of off cycle to that. If there's something in the middle of the week that we think is important, we'll get that out in the middle of the week as just a board FYI. But felt it's pretty useful to have one place you can go once a week and say, here's all the different subjects being covered in the news and through media and others. So if that works for you, then provide, or if there's suggestions, just let us know. Let's see, on the, just a second here. There were a couple pieces of correspondence. One was about a community care program, which we're piloting with some organizations. Let's say organizations, not individuals, but organizations that help out with homeless shelters specifically. And then the other piece of correspondence had to do with the review of the EWEB bylaws that will bring back to the board. And if there was guidance, there's really just a trigger that you can provide feedback or guidance or thoughts on that either tonight or in our check-ins. Those were the two correspondence items for this evening.
So I just had a question on the pilot program for the community. I think it's a great idea. So basically it's helping nonprofits that using the money that we have to help supplant, your energy bill for those. I guess the question that I would have on this is it's fairly vague as to who the nonprofits are. It's just, a 501c3 that primary function is providing assistance to unhoused populations. So to me, I'm thinking in my head who that is, and I'm thinking that, St. Vinny would be one, Catholic Community Services would probably be one, but are the big housing providers, are those going to be part of it too? I mean, is Homes for Good or and my question regarding that is I'm wondering if there's duplication. So if Homes for Good is getting supplemented on this, and then we're also supplementing the people that are living in the properties at Homes for Good, are we getting a double dipping? And I just wasn't sure about that, who these people are or these organizations are, because I think the goal is very laudable, but I'm a little uncertain about it.
Yeah, certainly the goal is not to double dip and to ensure that we're working with organizations that are doing this in bulk. So if Homes for Good had an individual that was that I would not qualify under this program. So yeah. Now that said, I'll work with Julie and staff to kind of get you a little better feel for what organizations. In fact, we could put that in our quarterly reporting for the board and sort of be on the lookout for that. So I think I understand what I'm hearing. Let's not do the individual and the organization.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if we're giving it to St. Vinny's because they're doing dusk to dawn, right? And they've got 70 people that are, and we're helping with their energy bill. But if we're giving it to Homes for Good and they're offsetting their bill, and then the people who are in the Nell or whatever, one of their complexes, are also getting their bills reduced. I'm not sure.
We'll double check that. That's going to have to do with how the account holder situation is structured, but
yeah, I don't know.
I'll follow up with staff on that.
And there's a cap, so it's not like, they're going to get $25,000 for 501c3. It's a small amount, so it's not real worried. It just wasn't clear to me how that worked.
I think there's a distinction between housing and sheltering. Homes for Good does housing, apartments, et cetera. And we're talking about sheltering facilities, right? Where people are probably living in tents or other non-housing, like non-full service living situations. So I guess there's not.
The wording says a 501c3 status whose primary function is providing assistance to the unhoused population. So Homes for Good is, would fit that definition. So
I'll just follow up with staff and make sure that we have.
And I'm not picking on Homes for Good. I'm sorry. They're a great organization doing great work.
Yeah, and thanks for clarifying on that. I don't want to go further there. It says it's $10,000 to $15,000 total we're spending here out of customer donations, right? Yeah. This isn't like ratepayer and it's not a huge sum. And in fact, my question is, might EWEB put in some of our own ratepayer funds to make this a larger sum of fund? I don't know what the total demand is. I will say I was contacted by one group that was doing sheltering that was looking for support from EWEB to help with a facility that had a large indoor facility that could provide some shelter from the rain, but they were looking for lighting, and that gets expensive pretty quickly. And so they were looking for our help with that. So my guess is there's more than $15,000 worth of demand for this. And if there is, I think it'd be worth us talking about how can we support that using ratepayer funds, not just the customer donations.
There's a couple things to put into that process. One is, this is a pilot, so we'll have to gauge and see what kind of organizations we're getting, what kind of response and demand we're getting, and that'll be part of sort of that side of the equation. The other one will be, how do we, so ratepayer funds are different. You start to create other tensions. And one of the things that we'll continue to do is to take a look at the energy, I'll call energy, I'm not going to call it energy burden. The state of Oregon refers to energy burden as those who spend 6% of their median income on energy, and that could be natural gas, electric, or whatever. We have utilities, so we have electricity and water, but there is a certain percentage of our population that falls in an income range where I think we need to periodically go look at our customer care program and see, are we funding the level of support that we think we're funding in the community? And that weighs into that equation, because at some point, the best help is to keep all rates low, but then you also want to make sure you're serving this utility burdened population as well. And that balances in with the homeless assistance program. So I guess what I'm saying is these have to be looked at sort of holistically. But the goal of the pilot is to check and see what the response is. So
yeah, I'll be curious to hear what the response is, and I would love, a report back if there's an opportunity to do that.
And I think target, I see Julie's on the call, but I think I'll target maybe something around mid-year that we can do a check-in and say, okay, and probably the mid-year quarterly report is something that we'll just plan to give you an update on it.
And just one last thing, I think once you identify who the target audience for this is, communicating it out to them is going to be an important part of it as well. What's the communication plan to let these agencies know that this assistance is available, so that it doesn't get all, so that it's doing what we hope it will do? And that's part of that is the calling them up and saying, hey, you guys are eligible.
Any other items, topics?
Well, I really appreciate the media roundup, so thank you for that.
Do you have anything else?
I think that's it then. Well, we will move to board wrap up. Does anybody have anything?
I forgot to mention earlier, I'm going to attend the Lane Electric board meeting on the 22nd because I'm their liaison. And I want free lunch anyhow. But also, we got beat up pretty good in the weekly about totally disregarding the historic significance of Weaver Powerhouse. If any of you read that article, it pretty much chastised us and told us we're insensitive. We're going to clear cut it. And we need more like a kind of a letter of saying, no, we don't intend to tear it down. We do intend to respect the integrity of the historical significance, and et cetera, and just kind of let them know that, I mean, since we're kind of media starved in this community, and let somebody know that, no, we're not going to tear it down. We are going to respect it. How are we doing that?
I'll get with staff and get back to you, Commissioner, on that particular subject. Maybe when we check in next week.
That's great. I just
the building they took a picture of is not the dam. So if they took a picture of the powerhouse.
Well, it's a powerhouse. I think they wanted because of the Art Deco on the outside. They wanted.
Right. And I don't know what the plan is for the powerhouse at this point. So I'll follow up with you.
It would be nice to know, because I personally would have a very strong objection if we did anything other than, but because that would be my own personal preference. I think it does have some historical significance. So put that right up.
Sure, staff is listening in right
Oh, I don't, I've already got, I don't wait for cards of condolence anymore. I'm done. Thank you. Oh, and one last thing, I'd like to welcome Brian. Brian, I'd just like to welcome you and say, good luck here at EWEB. It's a great organization. So I think you made the right decision.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and I hope we won't need too much luck.
Okay. Done. All right. Thank you, everyone. Meeting's adjourned.